What if the sky isn't just blue, but a canvas painted with forgotten fears? Imagine standing in the silence before the storm, a stillness so heavy it feels less like air and more like breath being held by something ancient. We look up and see clouds, rain and lightning, but history whispers a different truth. The wind carries the plague, the fog hides the boundaries of our world, and the rain is sometimes red with blood. For centuries, every flicker of lightning and every mysterious drop was an omen, a curse, or a message from entities we dared not name. Tonight, we peel back the layers of science to reveal the chilling history and supernatural significance of the air we breathe and the storms we fear. The weather is not merely water, wind, and temperature. It is history's most powerful, unpredictable storyteller. Before barometers and satellites, humans saw the sky as the literal home of the gods, the arena for demons, or the instrument of cosmic justice. Understanding the weather means understanding the fear of the unknown, the terror of a sudden flood wiping out a civilization, or a phantom wind carrying a lethal whisper across continents. We are exploring the myths, the historical oddities, and the creepy truths of the atmosphere that shaped our darkest beliefs. The omens of thunder. Long ago, before scientists knew about electricity, people were terrified of thunder. They didn't hear a sound wave, they heard the voice of an angry god. Think of the Norse people who believed the deep rumble was the sound of Thor's giant hammer smashing the clouds. They believed a loud, sudden clap of thunder was a direct command or warning meant just for them, a terrifying message that demanded immediate obedience or sacrifice. The terrifying sound also had a very practical purpose in many ancient cultures, warding off evil spirits. Across Europe, ringing church bells or banging pots was a common, desperate attempt to create a louder noise than the thunder itself. This practice was based on the simple, primal belief that the demons and evil spirits travelling on the storm winds were afraid of loud noises, especially the sacred chime of the bell. The ancient Babylonians took this fear to an extreme level. They believed that when thunder struck, the soul of a powerful deceased person was escaping the underworld to walk among the living. This meant that every thunderclap was a spiritual event, a momentary tear in the fabric of reality, allowing the dead to visit the terrified world of the living. This turned every storm into a ghost story. Rainbows as bridges of the dead. We see a rainbow as a beautiful promise of calm after the rain, but many cultures saw it as a sinister highway for something terrible. In parts of South America, certain tribes would not point at a rainbow, believing that the act would cause them to develop a terrible, wasting disease or even die. They thought the bow itself was a venomous snake, drinking from the river and ready to strike anyone who showed disrespect. In Norse mythology, the rainbow was called Bifrost, the shimmering bridge that connected the world of men to the home of the gods. But it was not a safe road. It was watched by the god Heimdall and reserved only for the good. The myth warned that when the final battle, Ragnarok, arrived, the dark forces would use the rainbow bridge to invade the world, shattering it in fire and causing utter chaos for all creation. Perhaps the creepiest belief came from Slavic regions, where the rainbow was seen as a siphon. They believed certain rain spirits used the colourful arc to suck the water directly from lakes, streams and wells. Worse still, they thought these spirits were not just taking water, they were also taking the souls of those who walked too close to where the rainbow touched the earth, stealing them to live forever in the sky. The cold snap's curse. Sometimes the weather changes so fast it feels wrong, like the earth itself is flinching. The sudden, unnatural cold snap, which drops temperatures in hours, was often feared as the arrival of a curse. In places like Scotland and Ireland, they had legends of a creature called the Cailleach, a witch-like spirit who used a magical staff to freeze the land and steal the warmth from living things. This fear was based on real terror. If the cold came too early, it meant all the crops would die instantly, leading to starvation and death across the community. Imagine waking up to find your entire food source, your entire world, suddenly coated in lethal ice. This sudden loss of life was often blamed not on nature, but on a hidden enemy or a terrible sin committed by the people, invoking divine punishment. Even when the sudden freeze was small, it was still eerie. Sailors reported finding ships where the crew was frozen solid, mid-meal or mid-step, victims of an instant, inexplicable wall of ice. It suggested a power far greater than regular nature, a power that could pause life itself. This is why a cold snap felt like the devil's breath, a quick, silent way to gather souls before a person even knew they were gone. Phantom fogs and the boundaries of reality. Sometimes fog isn't just water vapour. It's a curtain drawn between two worlds. Across Europe, mist and thick fog were considered boundary conditions, places where the veil between the living and the dead grew thin. They were believed to be the preferred hunting grounds for ghosts, spirits, and even the creatures of the wild hunt, who used the low visibility to silently sweep up the unwary. The thick, silent atmosphere turned familiar roads into confusing, dangerous labyrinths. The creepiest historical belief involved fog-eaters. These were not atmospheric phenomena, but supernatural entities that lived within the deepest, coldest banks of fog. They were said to feed on the breath and warmth of anyone lost in their territory, leaving behind corpses frozen from the inside out. To enter a deep fog was to risk having your very life force inhaled by a silent predator of the air, ensuring a creeping internal death. Even in modern history, dense fog has been blamed for mass hysteria and strange disappearances. The famous London pea souper fogs were so thick and dark that they provided perfect cover for criminals, turning city streets into lawless, gasping corridors. The fog wasn't the crime, it was the accomplice, proving that the weather can actively assist the darkest parts of human nature simply by removing light. The eerie phenomenon of red rain. Imagine looking up and seeing not clear water, but drops the colour of fresh blood. Throughout history, the fall of red rain was taken as the most absolute omen of disaster, a direct sign of divine anger or an impending massacre. Ancient Romans believed it signalled the death of kings or a devastating military defeat, sometimes even refusing to fight until the blood-red colour vanished from the skies. Science now tells us this is often caused by dust-carrying red fungal spores or desert iron oxide, but the historical accounts are still deeply unsettling. In 1883, a massive red dust storm in the Sahara caused blood rain to fall across Europe, terrifying millions. It wasn't the dust that was scary. It was the sudden, graphic realization that the entire continent was being linked by a single, terrifying aerial event. In the year 2001, in Kerala, India, documented red rains lasted for months. When scientists studied the drops, they found strange, thick-walled cells that some initially speculated might be extraterrestrial. The idea that a single rain shower could carry life from another planet, or at least materials that defy explanation, transforms the simple weather event into a cosmic horror movie. Will-o'-the-wisps as traps, the flickering strange lights seen over marshes at night. The will-o'-the-wisps were often explained as burning marsh gas, but history tells a much darker story. They were believed to be malevolent spirits, sometimes the tormented souls of the unbaptized, or worse, demons waiting to trick travellers. They seemed to appear and disappear on purpose, luring the curious deeper into the dangerous watery landscape. The wisps didn't just hover, they led people. Their goal was not to frighten, but to lure the lost traveller deeper into the bog, to a place where they would eventually sink and drown. To follow the light was to commit yourself to a silent, creeping death, orchestrated by an atmospheric entity that feasted on your final panic. They are lights that lead only to the shadows and the grave. In German folklore they were called Irrlicht, wandering lights, and were said to be the cursed souls of those who had moved property boundaries or cheated others out of their land. They were forced to wander forever, unable to find rest, and sought to drag the living into their swampy, hopeless torment. The innocent light was actually a terrible, restless curse. The pestilence of the wind before germ theory. When a deadly sickness like the Black Death swept through a village, people didn't blame fleas or bacteria, they blamed the wind. They believed the air itself became poisoned, a noxious miasma that carried pestilence. This wasn't just bad air, it was living, sentient malice in the atmosphere. To protect themselves, wealthy citizens would carry pomanders, small containers filled with sweet herbs, believing the fragrance could push the deadly wind away. The fear wasn't entirely wrong. dust storms or trade winds did carry disease-ridden rats and insects across vast distances. But instead of seeing a natural phenomenon, people saw a spiritual one. The wind was a demon's breath, deliberately exhaled over the cities as a form of divine punishment for sin. Even opening a window was a terrifying gamble, a direct invitation for the corrupted air to enter the sanctity of the home. Medieval doctors went to incredible, creepy lengths to fight the wind. They would light huge, noxious fires in the streets, believing the smoke would purify the infected air. This often involved burning aromatic wood and herbs, but sometimes involved burning materials that made the air even worse, like sulfur, creating a choking chemical fog in an attempt to defeat the atmospheric demon. The shadow of the solar eclipse. The solar eclipse has always been a moment of primal existential dread. It's the moment when the cosmic clock stops and the source of all life is violently consumed. Across many cultures, the sudden descent into twilight was caused by a colossal monster, a dragon, a jaguar, or a monstrous wolf devouring the sun. This was the ultimate cosmic struggle, and if the sun didn't return, everything would end forever. Historically, eclipses were terrifying for those in power. They were seen as direct signs that a king had lost the favour of the heavens, leading to immediate public panic and sometimes outright revolt. The Chinese would beat drums and shoot arrows into the sky to scare the celestial dragon away. For a few minutes, the entire world stopped, forced to wait in silence and darkness, praying that the light would return. In the old world, the eerie light and shadow effects caused by a partial eclipse were believed to unleash temporary madness in people and animals. The world felt wrong, the colours muted, and the shadows behaved strangely, a perfect time for evil magic to flourish. This atmospheric oddity provided the perfect alibi for chaos, allowing the truly terrified and the truly malicious to act out their worst impulses. The devil's hailstone's hail is frozen water, but when stones the size of fists fall from a clear sky, it feels supernatural. In the medieval world, destructive hailstorms were almost always blamed on witches or warlocks who had made pacts with the devil. They were believed to use dark magic to condense the water in the clouds, creating solid bullets of ice meant to destroy crops and kill livestock as an act of calculated malice against humanity. This fear led to the terrifying practice of storm persecutions. If a village was hit by a particularly severe hailstorm, authorities would often look for a scapegoat, leading to forced confessions and the execution of those accused of being weather witches. The weather's fury was answered with human fury, proving that the terror of the sky could be even more dangerous than the hailstones themselves. The size of the hail was also significant. In some cases, enormous chunks of ice have fallen that are so heavy and strange they seem impossible to have formed naturally. These were called devil's tears, or sky stones, and they fueled the belief that demons were deliberately throwing pieces of frozen hell down at the earth, creating miniature instant disasters with focused malice. Whispers in the wind, Aeolian harp. Throughout the Renaissance and Romantic eras, people were captivated by the haunting sounds produced by an Aeolian harp, a stringed instrument placed in a window so the wind could play it. But the sound was often unsettling, a pure, wordless wail. Superstition held that these were not musical notes, but the literal whispers of passing ghosts, sometimes the souls of those who died in tragic, lonely circumstances. When the wind was particularly strong, the resulting chorus of sound was sometimes described as a demonic singing, a chorus of despair, or a prophecy of doom. This belief transformed the gentle, unseen movement of air from a neutral force into an active communicant, a medium through which the supernatural world could speak directly into your home. The wind's song was the sound of the void. The eerie phenomenon led to the rise of wind worship in some isolated communities. They would leave small offerings, like strips of cloth or shiny coins, tied to trees or hung on fences, hoping to appease the invisible spirit that controlled the wind's voice. They feared that if the wind stopped speaking, it meant the spirit had moved on, taking all protection and leaving them vulnerable to worse demons. The creeping glacier's silent advance glaciers are often seen as huge static blocks of ice, but they are actually massive, slow rivers of frozen water, and their slow movement has caused real horror. Historically, when a glacier advances, It is utterly unstoppable, burying entire forests, farms, and even villages beneath thousands of tons of ice and snow. This relentless, silent advance was often believed to be the curse of a wronged spirit or a powerful giant coming to reclaim the land that was once its own domain. The fact that the destruction took years, not seconds, only made the fear worse. The most unsettling aspect is how glaciers preserve the dead. People who fall into crevices or are caught in avalanches are sometimes found perfectly frozen decades or even centuries later, looking exactly as they did in their final terrifying moment. The glacier becomes a perfect tomb, holding the secrets of the past in cold storage, waiting for the ice to melt and release the chilling evidence of its unstoppable power back into the living world. The perfect preservation creates a horrifying, staring ghost from the past. In the 18th century, some people in the Alps developed a strange kind of sickness called glacier fear. This was not just a fear of falling, but a deep psychological terror of the ice itself, the sheer scale, the cracking sounds, and the knowledge that something so vast and cold was slowly but surely coming for them. They saw the glacier not as geology, but as a colossal, breathing white monster with an appetite for human settlements and souls. The fear of being swallowed by the white silence was overwhelming. The rains of frogs and fish. One of the oldest and strangest meteorological events is the raining down of animals, fish, frogs, or even worms, sometimes thousands of them at once. To anyone witnessing this, it could only mean one thing: the natural order had collapsed. Biblical tales mention plagues of frogs, but to see it actually happen, with the ground hopping with living creatures that fell from an empty sky, was proof that the gods were actively mocking humanity. This bizarre atmospheric event turned the gentle rain into a sudden, grotesque invasion from above. The panic was intense because there was no logical explanation. People believed the animals were not from the sky, but were being instantly created from the mud and slime by black magic or demonic influence. Farmers would often flee their land, convinced the soil itself was cursed, and that the creatures were merely the first physical signs of a creeping supernatural rot that would soon consume everything they held dear. To them, the creatures were demons dropped from the heavens. In 1873, a documented rain of frogs occurred in Kansas City, covering a large area. While we now blame waterspouts and strong winds, imagine being the first person in the 19th century to step outside and find your entire yard, roof, and street covered in terrified, slick amphibians. It's an impossible scenario made real by the whims of the atmosphere, turning the gentle relief of rain into a sudden, chaotic and grotesque invasion. The cursed year without a summer. The year 1816 is known as the Year Without a Summer, and it was a global horror show caused by the eruption of Mount Tambora. Across the northern hemisphere, snow fell in June, crops failed, and the summer sun vanished behind a perpetual toxic haze. This was interpreted not as a geological event, but as the literal end of the world, predicted in various religious texts as a sign of the final judgment. The sun, the source of all life, was gone, replaced by chilling, toxic twilight. The atmosphere was choked with volcanic ash, creating a global sunset that never truly faded, and a creeping cold that refused to release its grip. The worst part was the starvation. People ate birds, cats, and whatever scraps they could find, convinced that God had simply turned off the light and warmth, punishing them with an endless, chilling twilight. Entire families and villages were wiped out not by war, but by the absence of warmth and light. The dark, hazy skies of 1816 were so oppressive and strange that they inspired some of the greatest horror stories ever written. Mary Shelley, trapped indoors in the gloomy, cold summer weather, began writing Frankenstein. The year proved that the weather is not just a backdrop, but a powerful, cruel collaborator in the creation of human madness and fear, shaping our art and our deepest nightmares. The terrifying atmosphere drove people to create monsters, skyquakes, and atmospheric cannons. Imagine a clear, still day when, without warning, a sound like distant, heavy cannon fire or a massive rolling explosion rattles your windows, but there is no smoke, no lightning, and no war. These phenomena are called skyquakes, and they have terrified coastal communities for centuries. When they were heard, people immediately believed a supernatural battle was raging just above the clouds, a sound meant only for the ears of mortals. The invisible explosions seemed to be a sign of cosmic warfare. Before the age of science, the only explanations for such a massive invisible noise were terrifying. Either sea monsters were bellowing deep below the waves, or the air was being ripped apart by invisible, colossal demonic hands. Villagers would light candles and ring church bells furiously, trying to drown out the noise or ward off the unseen evil that was shaking the very sky above their homes. They fought the atmospheric terror with sound and prayer. Even today, scientists can't definitively explain all skyquakes. Some may be distant earthquakes or meteors, but many remain a complete mystery. The eerie quality of the sound, a deep booming thoom that comes from nowhere and shakes everything, reminds us that the atmosphere holds acoustic secrets that still defy our understanding, making the air we breathe a canvas for inexplicable, terrifying noise. It is a primal sound of dread. The cloud of dust and doom. Throughout the 1930s, the American Great Plains were swallowed by the Dust Bowl, a terrifying environmental disaster where gigantic black clouds of dust rolled across the landscape, sometimes reaching miles high. These were called black blizzards, and they were seen by many deeply religious communities as a modern, Old Testament-style curse, a punishment for the sin and greed that had ruined the land. The sheer scale of the dust storm felt like a judgment. When a black blizzard hit, the sky turned to midnight in minutes. The dust was so fine it seeped into every crack and crevice, choking livestock and coating people's lungs, sometimes leading to a condition called dust pneumonia. Farmers often watched their entire livelihoods, their fields, their homes, and their futures literally vanish inside a moving wall of airborne dirt, leaving behind only despair and an eerie, dry silence. The wind was carrying the earth itself to suffocate them. The fear was primal. What if the earth itself had decided to expel humanity? The dust wasn't just weather, it was the pulverized memory of fertile land, driven by a cruel wind to exact a terrifying vengeance. People would find furniture polished clean in one spot and completely buried in another, suggesting a focused, deliberate attack by the atmosphere itself, forcing millions to abandon their homes and become desperate wandering refugees. The earth itself turned hostile. Eerie green clouds. Before a tornado. If you live in tornado country, one of the most frightening omens you can see is a storm cloud that turns an unnatural, sickly green colour. Scientifically, this is caused by light scattering through large amounts of hail within the storm, but to the observer, it looks alien and wrong. It's the visual signature of a truly violent atmosphere, the eerie jade glow that signals the air has become supercharged with destructive energy. The sky turns the colour of deep sickness and decay. Historically, this colour was often associated with rot, sickness, and the presence of malevolent spirits. Before a tornado struck, people described the sky as having a sulphuric look, linking the green cloud to the smell of the devil's breath, or the toxic atmosphere of the underworld opening up. The green light seemed to stain the world below it, turning familiar fields and houses into a landscape of utter dread and unnatural colour. The storm seemed to emit a poisonous glow. The green sky doesn't just look creepy. It creates a specific, palpable feeling of doom. It is the colour of the final warning, the visual cue that nature has reached a breaking point, and that the only thing coming is a vortex of unstoppable chaos. It's a silent visual scream from the heavens, telling you that your time to seek shelter is running out, and that the atmosphere is about to be weaponized against you. This colour is the face of destruction. Water devils and whirlwind spirits. Whirlwinds, or dust devils, are not just small, spinning columns of air and dust. They were once viewed as spirits, sometimes mischievous, sometimes deadly. In the desert cultures of the Middle East, they are known as jinn or sand spirits, believed to be malicious entities that travel the wasteland in spinning columns of air. It was absolutely forbidden to throw anything into a dust devil, as it was considered an act of war against the elemental spirit inside. The whirlwind was a sacred, dangerous entity. The fear came from the sudden, inexplicable nature of the whirlwind. It could appear from nowhere on a calm day, moving rapidly and focused on a single spot, like an invisible hand reaching down from the sky. Sailors also reported water devils in the ocean, small, violent water spouts that seemed to appear and dissipate on command, often linked to the myth of a sea monster or an angry water spirit rising to the surface to stir up trouble. The water and the air teamed up to menace sailors. The creepiest part is the idea that these entities can be summoned. Many local superstitions describe specific rituals or incantations that can bring a whirlwind into being to curse an enemy's crops or property. Whether a natural wind or a summoned demon, the dust devil represents the random, cruel nature of atmospheric power, focused down into a single, dancing column of destruction. It is chaos made small and intentional. The snow-eaters and their hot breath. The foehn wind, a warm, dry wind that blows down the leeward side of mountain ranges like the Alps, has a sinister reputation as the snow-eater. While the warmth is welcome, the wind is famous for causing deep psychological unrest and severe headaches, a sickness known in some areas as the Föhnkrankheit. The wind was blamed for everything from arguments and irritability to full-blown madness and even a higher rate of crime. The atmosphere itself was turning people into criminals. Historically, the foehn wind was considered a dangerous spiritual influence, a dry, hot, invisible force that literally cooked the sanity out of people's heads. Local courts in parts of Austria even accepted the foehn wind as a temporary insanity defense for crimes committed while the wind was blowing. The idea that a purely atmospheric condition could entirely erase your moral compass and make you commit terrible acts is profoundly chilling. The wind was a genuine excuse for murder. The wind also played a role in the legend of the wind devils, or Windhunde in German folklore. These were not natural winds, but invisible, demonic hounds that followed the foehn's path, their hot breath melting the snow and driving people crazy. The snow-eater isn't just a weather event. It's a terrifying example of how wind can physically and mentally control human behavior, twisting minds with its breath. The air itself was trying to steal sanity. The silence before the storm. The deepest, most unsettling part of any hurricane or major storm is the unnatural silence that falls just before the violence breaks. This sudden, absolute stillness, where the birds stop singing and the air grows heavy and thick, was seen as nature holding its breath, a sign that something enormous and evil was approaching. People believed that during this calm, the demonic forces of the storm were entering the physical world. This perfect silence signaled the end of the world's peace. This silence was not peaceful. It was a terrifying vacuum. It felt like a pause between heartbeats, and if you listened closely, ancient superstitions claimed you could hear the whispering of the storm demons planning their attack. This stillness was interpreted as a final chance for the pure of heart to pray, or for the guilty to confess, before the chaos was unleashed and the air turned into a physical weapon of mass destruction. The silence demanded a final accounting of the soul. Even scientifically, the dead calm is eerie. It is caused by the sudden drop in atmospheric pressure as the heart of the storm approaches, a phenomenon our bodies can often sense before our eyes can see it. That biological dread, the feeling of pressure crushing your chest, is a primal warning that the normal physics of the world are about to be violently inverted, and the atmosphere is preparing its first, terrifying strike. Your body senses the coming terror. The rain of black dust and soot. Black rain, composed primarily of soot and ash, has fallen across industrialized cities for centuries, but before pollution was understood, it was a terrifying mystery. Medieval towns often saw rain that looked like ink, believing it to be the literal tears of the damned or the residue of a great battle, fought between angels and demons just above the clouds. This rain felt like a curse, dirtying everything it touched and signalling the decay of the mortal world. The heavens were weeping darkness upon the land. One of the creepiest historical accounts of black rain occurred in 18th century England, where large quantities of black, greasy soot fell across entire counties. It was so intense it stained sheep and vegetation for days. People saw it as a sign of imminent plague or war, convinced that the devil was using the atmosphere to coat the land in his own grime. The black rain transformed the gentle landscape into a canvas of despair and sickness. While we now know it comes from factories, the historical fear was justified. They didn't know they were breathing in toxic industrial waste. The rain of black dust proved that the actions of man could permanently pollute the heavens, turning the life-giving rain into a carrier of sickness and symbolic dread. It was the first sign that man could corrupt the pure elements and bring down a self-inflicted curse from the sky. Man brought the evil upon himself, the false sun, sundogs, an omen of treachery. The atmospheric effect known as sundogs, or parhelia, creates bright spots of light on either side of the sun, making it appear as if 3 suns are hanging in the sky. While a beautiful phenomenon to us, historically this was an intensely frightening omen. Seeing multiple suns meant the heavens were in chaos, often predicting a deadly schism, a betrayal of kings, or a sudden, devastating war that would tear the kingdom into pieces. The most famous historical instance occurred over Stockholm in 1535, where the triple sun was interpreted as a sign of imminent divine judgment upon the city. The event was so terrifying that an artist was commissioned to paint the event, creating the famous Vedersolstallan, the sundog painting, which served as a lasting warning. The visual effect of having 2 witnesses to the real sun was considered unnatural and deeply unsettling. The false suns were feared because they represented a corrupted duality, a good sun and 2 evil reflections. To ancient observers, this meant that truth had been doubled and poisoned, leaving no certainty in the world. They believed the light was a trick of the devil, meant to drive people mad by questioning the simple, reliable laws of the cosmos and suggesting that reality itself was unstable. Coronae and glories, the eyes of the dead. When you see a bright ring of coloured light directly surrounding the sun or moon, that is a corona. When a pilot or mountain climber sees a massive shadowed figure surrounded by a rainbow halo in the mist, that is a glory. Ancient peoples believed these were the visual signatures of powerful spirits. The corona was the eye of an angry god watching the world, while the glory was the manifestation of a newly deceased soul. In remote mountain regions, the glory effect, where your own shadow is magnified and surrounded by light in the fog, was terrifyingly personal. People believed it was the ghost of a person who had died violently on the mountain, trying to warn the living, or worse, trying to lure them into the void to join them. This magnified shadow was a terrifying, towering doppelganger, standing right beside you, but completely untouchable. The glories were particularly unsettling to travellers because they made the individual appear gigantic and saintly in the mist. It was an uncanny moment of seeing yourself transformed into a mythic non-human scale. The fear was that the spirit was testing you, briefly giving you a divine appearance before deciding whether to accept you or throw you back down the mountain to your death. The Spectre of the Brocken. Related to the glory is the Spectre of the Brocken, a massive shadowy figure seen in high-altitude mists, often surrounded by a coloured light ring. This phenomenon is caused by an observer's shadow cast upon cloud droplets, but its historical impact was immense. On the Brocken mountain in Germany, people believed this monstrous shadow was the literal devil, or a powerful demon, holding court in the high mists. The sheer size of the shadow, sometimes hundreds of feet tall, made people believe they were witnessing a genuine supernatural entity. People would flee the mountainside in terror, convinced they had stumbled upon a gathering of witches or a direct manifestation of evil. The shadow often seemed to move or wave its arms, simply because the mist itself was moving and causing a visual effect that mirrored the observer's own movements. The terrifying illusion reinforced the idea that certain places are inherently cursed or spiritually charged. The Brocken, famous in folklore as a gathering place for witches during Walpurgis night, became synonymous with the devil because of this optical trick. The mountain itself seemed to be conspiring with the atmosphere to create a horrifying visual lie that preyed on human fear and superstition. Lunar halos and the ring of the dead. When a large, wide ring forms around the moon, known as a lunar halo, it is usually caused by ice crystals high in the atmosphere. To ancient people, however, the circle was often called the ring of the dead, or the coffin ring. They believed the halo was a supernatural enclosure, a ring where the souls of those who had recently died were trapped before they could find their final rest. The ominous appearance of the halo meant that the line between life and death had been visibly blurred. People would stay indoors, convinced that the souls trapped in the circle were trying to reach down and pull the living up to join them in the cold, high atmosphere. The moon, usually a symbol of calm, became a terrifying, glowing portal, watched by restless spirits waiting for company. Furthermore, a specific superstition claimed that counting the stars visible inside the ring would tell you how many days were left until the next great disaster, be it plague, famine, or war. This turned a simple atmospheric effect into a cruel, visible countdown to the end of their world, forcing them to look upon the moon with a specific creeping sense of temporal dread. The phantom lights, St. Elmo's fire. St. Elmo's fire is a strange, luminous, bluish-white glow that sometimes appears on the masts of ships, the spires of buildings, or the wings of airplanes during a thunderstorm. It is plasma created by intense electrical field activity, but sailors once viewed it as a potent divine sign. When it appeared, some believed it was the spiritual protector of sailors, St. Erasmus, appearing to guide them through the raging sea and ensuring safe passage. However, the light also had a terrifying duality. If 2 points of St. Elmo's fire appeared on the mast, it was a good omen. But if only one single point of light appeared, it was known as the fire of evil, signalling that a terrible disaster was about to strike the ship, often meaning certain death. The faint glow became a literal life or death prophecy delivered directly by the atmosphere itself. The eerie, cold glow gave rise to legends of ghostly ships. Mariners would report seeing derelict vessels sailing through storms, their masts eerily lit by the St. Elmo's fire sailing on with no crew. They believed the light was illuminating the souls of the damned, forever cursed to sail the high seas, a visual reminder that the ocean could hold onto your spirit long after your body was gone. Columnar ice crystals and light pillars. In extremely cold weather, tiny flat ice crystals float in the air, acting like mirrors and reflecting light upwards, creating mesmerizing light pillars. This optical phenomenon creates vertical beams of light that seem to shoot directly out of the ground or out of the sky into the heavens. To ancient communities, these pillars were terrifying signs that the fabric of the universe was being pulled apart, creating visible avenues for gods or demons. The light pillars were often interpreted as the literal path of spirits. If the light was pale and white, it was a highway for benevolent gods. But if the light was red or blue and pulsed unnaturally, it was seen as the road used by demons to ascend or descend. People would carefully avoid the ground where the pillar appeared to be touching, terrified of being sucked into the celestial highway by an unseen force. In certain Scandinavian myths, these light pillars were considered the smoking ruins of a star that had fallen to Earth, a piece of cold, dead space debris that was now radiating a haunting, cold light. The atmosphere was essentially showing them the terrifying decay of the cosmos, reminding them that the grand forces of the universe were powerful enough to destroy stars and send the smoking wreckage down to their world. The Phantom Ship Mirage, Fata Morgana. The Fata Morgana is a complex mirage that occurs when warm air layers sit over colder air, bending light rays to make distant objects, often ships, appear distorted, stretched, and sometimes floating in the air. Named after the sorceress Morgan Le Fay, who was said to conjure illusory castles, this phenomenon was deeply feared by sailors. They believed the sight of a phantom ship was a direct sign of a curse, or a lure leading them to shipwreck. The fear was amplified because the ships appeared to be sailing in the sky or impossibly fast. Mariners would watch in terror as a seemingly solid, massive warship would distort, stretch, and then vanish without a trace, convincing them they were being haunted by a ghost fleet. They were certain these phantom ships were crewed by the restless dead, sailing on the atmosphere itself to claim new victims and souls. The Fata Morgana played a powerful psychological role, making sailors question their own sanity and vision. When facing weeks alone at sea, seeing the impossible, a ship floating above the waves or a mountain range where there should be none, was enough to shatter a crew's morale. The weather wasn't just physical, it was an active mental tormentor, using light and air to generate terrifying, impossible lies. The creepy sound of aurora, the aurora borealis, northern lights, is a beautiful display of lights, but for centuries people believed the movement of the shimmering colours was accompanied by an audible hissing sound. This low, spooky sound, often described as a whisper or a sharp crackle, was taken by the Inuit and other northern peoples as the voices of the dead reaching out from the sky. The lights were a bridge, and the sound was their cold greeting. The Inuit believed that the souls of the departed were playing a macabre game of ball with a walrus skull, and the crackling sound was the noise of their ethereal game. It was a rule of survival. If the lights were close and the whispers loud, you were not to whistle or call out, for doing so would attract the attention of the dead and pull your soul right out of your body to join their freezing, endless game. Though scientists long dismissed the sound as psychosomatic, recent studies using sensitive microphones have confirmed that faint, crackling sounds can be generated by the aurora, usually around 70 meters above the ground. The ancient peoples who heard the whispers were right. The sky is speaking to us, and the sound is the eerie, cold static of the cosmos reaching down to the earth. Fire in the fog, Arctic haze. In polar regions, a phenomenon called Arctic haze sometimes occurs, a dense, unnatural orange or brownish fog caused by distant pollution. Before the Industrial Age, however, any massive coloured haze over the ice was considered a sign of a curse or an impossible perpetual fire. Whalers and explorers reported the sun appearing sickly and orange for weeks on end, convinced that a massive subterranean fire was burning beneath the ice. The unsettling colour of the haze reinforced the idea that the frozen north was the literal gateway to hell or the realm of the damned. The unnatural smoky colour suggested that the land itself was being consumed by a slow, toxic heat from below, waiting to melt the ice and release an ancient evil. The haze wasn't just atmospheric. It was a smoke signal from the depths of the frozen underworld. The haze also created strange and unsettling visual effects, making objects appear larger, smaller, or strangely tinted. When ships encountered others during the haze, the distortion made them look like grotesque, shadowy apparitions, sailing under a cursed, sickly sun. This was enough to frighten entire crews, convincing them that the atmosphere was deliberately using light and colour to torture and deceive them with ghostly lies. The false dawn, zodiacal light. The zodiacal light is a faint triangular glow seen in the night sky just after sunset or before sunrise, caused by sunlight reflecting off cosmic dust. This slow, mysterious glow, sometimes called the false dawn, was often viewed as a spiritual deception. It looked like the sun was about to return, only to fade away again, tricking travellers into believing the night was over when deep darkness was still hours away. In ancient times, this light was often associated with a messenger of the gods, or even a precursor to a major celestial event, an angel or demon arriving early to stake their claim before the sun could witness them. The slow, ethereal glow was considered holy by some, and deeply cursed by others, but it always signalled that the atmosphere was not empty. It was full of invisible, powerful entities. The light's slow, creeping appearance and equally slow disappearance instilled a deep sense of temporal dread. It was a false promise of light, dragging out the most vulnerable moments of the day. This unnerving effect made people believe the stars themselves were watching them, using the faint, shimmering light to play cruel, cosmic tricks on human perception during the deepest hours of the terrifying night. The fog's memory. Fog is water vapour, but ancient cultures believed it could hold memory. A thick rolling fog over a battlefield or an old execution site was thought to be remanifesting the emotional trauma of the past. It was called a weeping ghost, not of a person, but of the event itself. When the fog rolled in, you weren't just experiencing bad visibility, you were stepping into a sensory echo of old pain, sadness, or terrible, whispered terror. The atmosphere became a giant psychic recorder, playing back historical dread on cue. The unsettling visual distortion caused by dense fog often led to madness. Travellers reported seeing impossible figures, loved ones who vanished, or shadows that moved too quickly. This confusion was blamed on the fog being a spiritual conduit, a place where demons whispered illusions directly into the human mind. The mist wasn't blurring your sight. It was actively creating sights that weren't real, blurring the line between reality and hallucination. In Celtic lore, thick mist was the curtain of the Side, the fairy realm. Entering a fog bank meant crossing into a parallel world where time moved differently and human logic failed. Many tales speak of people who walked into the mist and emerged centuries later, or not at all, having been trapped by the eternal twilight of the fairy courts. The fog was a terrifying temporary portal that could steal years or souls without a sound. The white wall, the coastal fog. The sudden arrival of coastal fog rolling in like a massive silent white wall was one of the greatest terrors for sailors. They believed this wall was guarded by giant sea monsters who used the fog to trap ships before dragging them down to the depths. The sudden loss of visibility meant the loss of all control, turning the open ocean into a narrow, fatal corridor where the unseen was always lurking, hungry and vast. The most unnerving characteristic of the sea fog is the way it muffles all sound, making the air thick and heavy. This total silence was not peaceful but predatory. Sailors felt the atmosphere was deliberately isolating them, silencing the waves and wind so the sound of the approaching monster, or the warning cries of a nearby shore, could not be heard. They called it the death whisper, a soundlessness that preceded the final audible crash. The legendary deadly fogs of the Grand Banks off Newfoundland were historically notorious. The constant, cold, damp atmosphere led to mass sinkings and endless disappearances, making the area a true graveyard of ships. Sailors were certain the fog was a sentient spirit, actively working to collect the souls of mariners, perpetually hungry for more ships to add to its sunken, silent collection beneath the waves. Text-to-image prompt. A powerful Baroque oil painting on canvas in the style of Caravaggio. A dark wooden fishing ship is completely swallowed by a colossal wall of dense white-grey sea fog. A lone sailor on the bow desperately rings a bell, his face illuminated by a small lantern. The fog feels like a suffocating presence. Negative prompt. Photo, photography, CGI, render, 3D, Pixar, total, actual. Words. 266. Fact to 33. The Whispering Bells, fog bells. Before electric foghorns, coastal towns relied on huge hand-rung bells to warn ships of the hidden shore. But when the fog was thick, the sound of the bell often seemed to come from the wrong direction, echoing, bending, or even speaking. Sailors believed the fog spirits could mimic the bells, deliberately misleading ships onto the rocks with a false, ghostly sound meant to tempt them to their destruction. The distortion was terrifying because the sound waves were bent by the uneven densities of the fog. Sometimes, a bell miles away would sound like it was right beside the ship, while the actual closer warning bell was entirely silent. This created a sense of acoustic paranoia, a world where the most important sensory input, sound, could not be trusted at all, making every decision a deadly gamble. In some folklore, the bells were not rung by living men, but by the ghosts of drowned sailors who were desperately trying to warn their former comrades, but whose voices were corrupted by the malevolent atmosphere. Their desperate, ghostly ringing was distorted into a dangerous, deceiving whisper by the djinn of the air. The sound was a tragedy, a warning that killed instead of saving. The green flash mirage. The green flash is a rare phenomenon, a momentary green flash of light seen just as the last sliver of the sun disappears below the horizon. Scientifically, it is a refraction effect, but historically its sudden, emerald burst was feared as the mark of a demon or the fleeting eye of a submerged, powerful sea god. The light was too unnatural, too perfect to be anything other than a purposeful celestial signal. Sailors in the 17th century held a powerful superstition. Anyone who saw the green flash was immediately granted the power to see into the minds of others and to perfectly discern the truth from lies. This power was both a blessing and a terrifying curse. It meant that every person who saw the flash was immediately burdened with a secret cosmic knowledge of human deceit. Because of its rarity and stunning visual beauty, some traditions saw the green flash as the eye of the cosmos closing on the world, the last sign before the ultimate catastrophe. It was believed to be the final fleeting glance of a dying god. After seeing it, you were doomed to witness the end of the world, making the beautiful sight a terrifying harbinger of cosmic oblivion. The cold breath of the graveyards often have microclimates, The stone and ground cover keep the air cooler, creating visible, low-lying mist even when the rest of the area is clear. Historically, this creeping, localized fog was known as the breath of the dead. It was believed to be the actual exhalation of the restless spirits buried beneath the stones, rising up to remind the living of their eternal cold presence. This low mist seemed to cling only to the tombs, making the graveyard appear to be actively breathing a cold, damp air. People feared stepping into it, believing the cold fog would cling to them, marking them as the next victim for the ground to swallow. The mist was seen as a physical, deliberate lure designed to pull the unwary into the grave sites to join the cold congregation below. Superstition warned against spending too long in the breath of the dead. It was said that the cold, damp air was not just water, it was the essence of the deceased, attempting to steal the warmth and life from the living. People would rush through the graveyard at night, convinced the rising vapour was actively trying to attach itself to their souls and drag them down into the chilling silence. Text to image. Prompt: a powerful Baroque oil painting on canvas in the style of Caravaggio. A Gothic graveyard at midnight. A low, rolling, unnaturally white mist. The breath of the dead clings only to the tombstones, while the area above is clear. A figure is fleeing the scene, looking back in terror at the creeping fog. Negative prompt: photo, photography, CGI, render, 3D, Pixar. Total actual words: 266. Fact: 36. Earthquakes that predict themselves. Animals. Before an earthquake strikes, many animals, dogs, birds, and even deep-sea fish, exhibit bizarre, erratic behaviour, fleeing for higher ground or screaming uncontrollably. This phenomenon, which terrified ancient people, was attributed to the earth spirits using animals as vessels to scream their warnings. The atmosphere itself felt wrong, and the animals were the only ones tuned to the silent, invisible pressure that preceded the devastation. Scientists speculate that animals can sense the subtle changes in the atmosphere, perhaps electromagnetic shifts or the release of certain gases, just before the Earth moves. To the early observers, this meant the atmosphere was actively fighting the Earth's movements, and the terrified animals were caught between these two battling cosmic forces. The animals were seen as martyrs, tormented by a sensory overload of impending doom. In historical accounts of Lisbon before the devastating 1755 earthquake, chroniclers wrote of birds leaving the city in huge flocks and dogs howling non-stop for days. This collective animal panic was almost as terrifying as the quake itself, because it proved the disaster was not a sudden accident, but a slow, calculated punishment that the animals knew was coming long before the humans. Cloud ships and flying castles. Reports of ships and even entire cities appearing to float in the sky date back centuries. These phenomena were often caused by complex mirages, fata morgana, or cloud formations, but to the observers, they were evidence of a cloud kingdom. This kingdom was believed to be populated by giants or benevolent gods, who sometimes allowed mortals a terrifying glimpse into their impossible, ephemeral realm high in the atmosphere. The cloud ships were not always friendly. In certain Viking sagas, these aerial vessels were the ships of the storm giants, and seeing them meant they were preparing to descend and wage war upon the mortals below. The sudden appearance of a colossal floating fortress in the sky was a clear visual signal that the battle for the heavens was about to spill over onto the earth. A disturbing medieval legend claimed that anything that fell from these cloud kingdoms was cursed or possessed of strange powers. There are ancient reports of people finding impossible artifacts after witnessing a cloud city mirage. The act of seeing the spectacle was enough to taint the ground beneath, making the weather not just an optical trick, but a source of unnatural, dangerous objects. The whispering sands, dune music. In vast deserts like the Gobi, certain dunes produce a deep resonant sound, sometimes a hum, sometimes a roar, known as singing sands. This eerie, powerful sound is caused by the shifting of millions of perfectly rounded, dry sand grains. Historically, this sound was not natural. It was the literal voice of a sleeping dragon, a powerful earth spirit or a trapped demon calling out for freedom. Travellers who spent too long near the singing sands often reported hearing voices, music, or the sounds of distant armies marching within the roar. This auditory hallucination, fueled by fear and isolation, turned the simple desert wind into a medium for terrifying personal messages. The sound was so deep and powerful that it seemed to vibrate in the listener's bones, commanding attention and obedience. Local law warned that walking too close to the source of the sound would lead to madness, as the voice of the trapped demon would take permanent root in your mind. The singing sands were therefore seen as a deliberate atmospheric trap, a sonic curse designed to lure the traveller into a hopeless, sun-baked landscape. The sound was a mesmerizing, fatal invitation to despair. The rain of sulphur and fire, volcanic ash. When a volcano erupts, it sends tons of ash, dust, and sulphur into the atmosphere, causing ashfall that can blanket vast regions. This often looked like black snow or heavy yellow rain. Historically, this rain of fire or sulphur rain was seen as the strongest possible sign of the gates of hell, opening directly beneath the earth. The sky was literally raining the toxic dust of the underworld onto humanity. The ashfall killed crops and livestock, and the fine dust caused respiratory sickness, which only strengthened the belief that the rain was poisoned. People believed the atmosphere was being choked by the demon of the mount, a specific demon residing in the volcano, who was using the air to distribute a deadly calculated plague upon the surrounding area. The weather became the perfect delivery system for toxic punishment. The lingering clouds of ash would sometimes block out the sun for months, plunging regions into a perpetual dim twilight. This unnatural darkness was the true terror, reinforcing the idea that the volcanic event was a permanent shift in the cosmic balance, proving that the Earth had rejected the light and chosen to live under the shadow of its own internal, toxic fire. The lightning that kills. Silence. Ball lightning. Ball lightning is one of the most mysterious atmospheric phenomena, a glowing, floating sphere of light that can appear silently and move deliberately before vanishing or exploding. It was believed to be a demonic entity, or a physical manifestation of pure, trapped electricity. The sphere was terrifying because it violated the laws of nature, appearing indoors, floating through walls, and seeming to seek out living targets. Unlike regular lightning, which is loud and fast, ball lightning is often silent and slow, giving the observer time to realize they are being hunted by a controlled, luminous entity. People believed the sphere contained the soul of an evil sorcerer who was using his final energy to commit a last act of vengeance. The light wasn't random energy, it was focused, deliberate, and intelligent malice. Even in modern times, sightings of ball lightning defy simple explanation. People report the sphere passing through glass without breaking it or hovering over a person's head for several minutes before fading. The fact that this atmospheric ghost can breach the defenses of our modern world and still remain a scientific enigma makes it the perfect symbol of nature's lingering, inexplicable horror. The singing snow, acoustic effects. In extremely cold, dry conditions, when footsteps compress fresh snow, a high-pitched squeak or crunching sound is often produced, sometimes called singing snow. To isolated travellers centuries ago, this sound was not friction. It was the snow itself speaking, often in warning. Folklore claimed the sound was the voice of a frozen, trapped spirit trying to communicate, or a territorial demon warning the living to turn back before the silence consumed them forever. The eerie acoustic effect works because ice crystals in cold temperatures become rigid and sharp, resonating when crushed. But imagine hearing that unsettling, high-frequency sound miles from any civilization, where the nearest sound should be your own breathing. The snow felt alive, giving away your position to predators or unseen horrors. The singing snow turned the peaceful blanket of winter into an active sonic threat that watched your every step. In some European traditions, the sound was believed to be the devil marking his territory. Wherever the snow sang, the ground beneath was considered cursed or consecrated to evil, making it a dangerous place for a mortal to step. The act of walking became a partnership with the demonic, with every step drawing a high-pitched, mocking chorus from the frozen earth beneath your feet, condemning the listener. Ice ghosts, cryogenic preservation. The horror of finding bodies perfectly preserved in ice and snow, sometimes called ice ghosts, has been a source of primal dread for centuries. These are not decaying remains but startlingly intact people who died suddenly, frozen in their final terrifying moment. The cold doesn't destroy, it simply pauses the process of death, turning a corpse into a staring, frozen testament to the mountain's merciless nature. Alpine climbers and travellers who discovered these figures were often driven mad by the sight. Finding a man from a forgotten era, perfectly preserved, broke their sense of linear time, suggesting that the mountain was a place where the past could reach out and grab the present. The discovery was like looking into a perfectly preserved mirror of your own inevitable frozen end, mocking your continued life. The most famous example is Ötzi the Iceman, found in the Ötztal Alps, a man who died over 5,000 years ago and whose body was perfectly preserved. The ice kept his tools, his clothes, and the contents of his stomach intact. The knowledge that the eternal cold can hold a life hostage for millennia, waiting for a chance encounter with the living, transforms ice into a terrifying, silent crypt keeper. The year the river died, frozen waterways. When massive, essential rivers suddenly froze solid during unnaturally harsh winters, it was seen as the literal heart of the land stopping. This was often called the year the river died. A frozen river meant not only the loss of trade and transport, but a spiritual catastrophe, symbolizing a failure of the divine promise to provide water and life. It was considered the ultimate curse, bringing famine and disease. In London, during the great frosts of the 17th and 18th centuries, the frozen River Thames was turned into a massive carnival called the Frost Fair. While seemingly celebratory, this was also a profound act of defiance and madness. People were dancing and drinking on the frozen surface of the dead river, celebrating their temporary dominion over the terrifying frozen nature of the curse. However, the frozen river also meant that the water demons were restless and trapped beneath the ice. The sound of the ice cracking and groaning was interpreted as the muffled shrieks of these ancient trapped entities, waiting for the thaw to take their vengeance. Even while dancing on the ice, people feared the frozen entity below would eventually shatter and pull the entire terrified carnival into the cold depths. The Snow Bride, seduction of the cold. Across Nordic and Slavic folklore, there is the terrifying legend of the Snow Bride or Ice Maiden. This spirit was a beautiful, ethereal woman made entirely of ice and snow, whose purpose was to lure travellers out into a blizzard. Her cold, quiet beauty was irresistible, and anyone who looked upon her felt an intense, feverish need to follow her into the darkest, most remote parts of the winter landscape. The Snow Bride's ultimate goal was not to simply kill the traveller, but to claim their warmth and their life force through an icy embrace. Her kiss was fatal, instantly freezing the victim, from the inside out and turning them into a new, beautiful frozen statue of terror. This legend warned that the ultimate danger of the cold was not just exposure, but a supernatural, tempting intelligence that actively desired human warmth. These stories reinforced the psychological terror of succumbing to hypothermia, which often leads to confusion and a final deceptive feeling of warmth. The Snow Bride was the personification of that final fatal mistake, the tempting spirit that convinced you to give up, lie down, and welcome the final gentle kiss of death in the vast, cold silence of the snow. The Star Eater, the cold vacuum. In many ancient and indigenous cosmologies, the greatest fear of the sky was not fire, but the cold vacuum, the terrifying infinite emptiness between the stars that they believed was trying to creep into the living world. The deepest cold felt by humans during winter was a tangible leak from that primordial void, and the wind was the breath of the Star Eater, an entity that consumed light and heat. This fear made the winter solstice incredibly dangerous. People believed the sun was dying, and the Star Eater was at its most powerful, ready to extinguish the light of the world entirely. They would build huge bonfires, make loud noises, and perform elaborate rituals to literally frighten the void away, and encourage the sun to return, waging a yearly, desperate war against the cosmic cold. The most unsettling result of this belief was the need for constant sound. Silence in the deep winter was seen as the Star Eater winning, because it meant the cold had crept into the heart of the world and frozen the noise itself. The cold was a vast, silent hunter, and the communities had to remain perpetually loud, beating drums and singing to ensure the atmosphere stayed warm and active. Ice needles, diamond dust, Diamond dust is a meteorological phenomenon where tiny ice crystals like frozen needles float in the air, glittering in the sunlight. To those who lived in extreme cold, this glittering air was not beautiful. It was the physical dust of a destroyed kingdom, or the shattered scales of an ice dragon that had just been defeated in a terrible cold battle. The air itself was full of deadly glittering remnants. The fear was practical too. These invisible ice crystals could cause a stinging, painful sensation on the skin, which was interpreted as a supernatural attack, 1,000 tiny, invisible needles being thrown by a malicious winter witch. People would cover every inch of their skin, believing the sparkling dust was trying to get into their eyes and lungs to steal their warmth and sight forever. The dust was also believed to cause the terrifying visual distortion that plagues the Arctic, making distances deceptive and shapes misleading. The atmospheric crystals were seen as tools of an evil entity, deliberately twisting light to make travellers see mirages or believe they were closer to safety than they really were, luring them to their deaths in the vast, empty cold. The ghost of the avalanche. An avalanche is a catastrophic physical event, but for centuries they were believed to be caused by a specific spirit, the avalanche ghost. This entity was usually the restless soul of a person who had died in a previous slide and who now took malicious pleasure in dragging the living down to join their silent, crushing tomb. The avalanche was not a slide of snow. It was a deliberate sentient attack. The silence that often precedes a massive snowslide was the most terrifying omen. People believed the ghost was holding its breath, waiting for the perfect moment to scream and send the tons of snow and ice crashing down. That unnerving pause, that moment where all nature seemed to stop moving and listening, was the time the spirit chose its victims and prepared its cold, crushing execution. Even the sound of the avalanche was spectral. The low guttural roar that preceded the slide was often interpreted as the ghost's demonic war cry, a sound of triumph as it claimed its next set of frozen souls. The legend warned that if you heard the sound, you were already marked, and your only hope was to pray that the sheer volume of the snow would not bury you alive forever. The voice of the creaking ice. When a frozen lake or pond experiences temperature changes, the expanding and contracting ice can produce deep, terrifying groans, booms, and cracking noises. This voice of the creaking ice was often believed to be a communication from a powerful submerged entity. Sometimes it was a huge prehistoric fish or sea monster. Sometimes it was the devil himself trying to break free from the icy prison that contained him. In northern communities, this constant, unsettling symphony of cold noise was a terrifying soundtrack to winter survival. The deeper the booms, the more restless the trapped entity was. People would avoid the ice when the groans were loudest, convinced that the frozen surface would shatter at any moment, not by natural means, but by the demonic beast breaking free to pull them into the freezing depths. The psychological impact of the sound was profound. It felt like the entire world was under intense pressure, constantly on the verge of imploding. This tension was attributed to the sheer force of the trapped demon trying to escape its cold, rigid bonds, making every moment spent near the frozen water a profound act of defiance against a powerful, trapped elemental force. The snow roller of the void. Snow rollers are a rare phenomenon where wind peels a cylinder of snow off the ground and rolls it, creating a donut-shaped formation that can look like a giant discarded spool. To early observers, this impossible self-rolling cylinder was proof that the air was full of invisible, mischievous spirits, playing a terrifying game with the frozen landscape, using the snow as their ethereal playground. The sheer unlikelihood of the formation, requiring a perfect combination of wind speed, temperature, and snow density, made the rollers appear supernatural. They seemed to move without purpose, guided by an invisible, intelligent hand. People believed that if you found one of these rollers, you must not disturb it, as it was a path laid out by the spirits, and interfering would invite their mischievous, often deadly wrath upon your home. In some European folklore, the rollers were the frozen shields or discarded war drums of the wild hunt, the procession of spectral riders who swept across the winter sky. Finding a roller meant you were on the edge of their cosmic battlefield, and that the storm demons were very close to your location, using the snowy surface to leave behind physical evidence of their passing fury. The blizzard of the whiteout. The whiteout is perhaps the most absolute terror of the cold. A storm so dense that the horizon and ground completely disappear, leaving the victim in a world of absolute uniform white. This total sensory deprivation was believed to be the devil's ultimate trick, to steal your vision, your direction, and your sanity, trapping you in a pure, cold void where even your own body was indistinguishable from the air. This condition caused immediate, terrifying disorientation. People would walk in circles for hours, unable to trust their senses, eventually collapsing in the belief that they had fallen off the edge of the world. The whiteout wasn't just weather, it was a physical manifestation of nothingness, proving that the atmospheric horror could literally erase the boundaries of your known reality. In Arctic myths, the whiteout was the great blank shroud of the Yeti or the Wendigo, a monstrous spirit that used the sensory void to approach and hunt its victims without being seen. The storm was the creature's cloak, and the silence was its perfect camouflage. To be trapped in the whiteout was to realize you were not alone, but that your killer was invisible, silent, and everywhere. The rain of blood, red dust. When the sky rains down a dark, thick reddish-brown water, it is called rain of blood. Historically, this phenomenon, caused by fine Saharan dust mixing with rain, was interpreted as the most terrifying sign of divine wrath. It was the literal tears of a vengeful god or the blood of fallen angels raining down as a direct visible curse upon mankind. The horror was that the most essential element, water, had been visibly corrupted. The panic this caused was immediate and absolute. People believed the red rain carried plague and death, and they would rush to seal their wells and doors, convinced the atmosphere was actively delivering a toxic, bloody contagion into their homes. The sight of red water filling cisterns and running through streets suggested that the world itself was hemorrhaging, and that life could no longer draw sustenance from the corrupted heavens. In some medieval accounts, this rain was seen as a spiritual warning, a crimson script written across the entire sky, marking the land for imminent destruction. The creepiest modern twist is that the dust carries bacteria and fungal spores, proving the ancient fear of contagion was correct. The sky truly was delivering a microscopic biological threat, wrapped in the terrifying colour of betrayal and death. The rain of sulphur, yellow pollen. Sometimes the sky releases a rain of sulphur, a startling event where everything is dusted in a fine, bright yellow powder. We now know this is massive amounts of pollen from trees, but to observers throughout history, it was the literal toxic fallout from the underworld. It was the atmospheric signature of the devil's breath, proving that the demonic pits of hell were actively venting their noxious smoke into the air we breathe. The fear was based on the colour and the texture. It looked and felt like the brimstone mentioned in religious texts. People were certain that inhaling the yellow dust would lead to immediate sickness, corruption of the soul, or spontaneous combustion. Priests would perform exorcisms over the affected fields, trying to cleanse the atmosphere of the toxic yellow curse delivered by the seemingly innocent clouds above. The unnerving nature of this yellow storm is that it is often localized, dropping its strange powder over a single village while leaving the next untouched. This selectivity convinced people the curse was personal and targeted, a specific punishment aimed at the sinful within that community. The atmosphere, using microscopic botanical dust, became an instrument of precise, localized divine judgment. Star jelly, atmospheric slime. After certain rains, a strange gelatinous translucent slime, known as star jelly, or astral gel, is sometimes found on the ground. For centuries, this impossible substance was believed to be the non-physical residue of a star that had exploded or crashed to Earth, leaving behind its unearthly, viscous remnants. It was the physical proof that the things that fall from the sky are not always solid rock or water. The slime often appears and then vanishes quickly, either decomposing or evaporating back into the atmosphere. This ephemeral quality convinced people that it was not of this world, perhaps a discarded tissue from a celestial body or an alien, protoplasmic form of life that could only survive briefly in the Earth's atmosphere. To touch it was considered dangerous, possibly leading to sudden cosmic infection or madness. Scientists have struggled to explain all accounts of star jelly, though some modern cases have been attributed to fungal matter or the partially digested material expelled by amphibians. But the enduring horror is the idea of unidentified atmospheric matter, a mysterious substance that seems to condense from the air, proving that the sky carries things that defy simple classification and organic life. The air of the plagues. Before germ theory, nearly all disease and plague were blamed on miasmas, toxic, polluted, heavy air rising from rotting organic matter or cesspits. The air itself was thought to be poisoned and sentient, deliberately carrying sickness to those who breathed it. This belief meant that your worst enemy was not a hidden bacterium, but the very atmosphere surrounding you, actively trying to kill you. The fear was magnified during the Black Death, where people wore masks stuffed with sweet herbs to protect themselves from the invisible, foul-smelling airborne killer. They believed the miasma could see, that it could target the weak and sinful, and that simply moving to a higher elevation was the only way to escape its crawling, heavy, toxic grip. The air was a slow, invisible, suffocating hunter. The most unsettling historical fact is how the miasma theory shaped social paranoia. People would blame the air that came from specific marginalized communities, believing the foulness was a result of moral decay. This turned atmospheric fear into a terrifying weapon of social control and superstition, proving that belief in a toxic sky can lead to very real, horrific human actions. Fire in the sky, meteors and bolides. When massive fireballs streak across the night sky, they are called bolides. Throughout antiquity, these intense fiery displays were never seen as rock, but as literal heavenly weaponry, the fiery spears of the gods, or the final, burning remnants of a defeated deity thrown down to earth. Witnessing a bolide meant the heavens were locked in a war so vast it was shedding burning shrapnel onto the mortal world below. The psychological impact of the sudden bright light and the subsequent terrifying sonic boom was immense. The sound was the voice of the atmosphere being ripped apart by a celestial weapon. The fire was seen as an omen of a devastating war that would soon erupt on Earth, mirroring the chaos in the sky, convinced that the fire was marking the place where the battle would begin. In some cultures, finding the resultant meteorite was considered deadly, as the rock was believed to be cursed or still physically hot with divine wrath. Even the sight of the smoking impact crater was enough to confirm that a non-human entity had physically struck the Earth. The atmosphere, by allowing these burning remnants to pass, was delivering tools of cosmic destruction to the terrestrial world. The voice in the wind, Aeolian harps. Sometimes the wind passes over wires, trees, or specific rock formations, and produces eerie, low-frequency musical sounds known as Aeolian music. Before this was understood, it was believed to be the literal voice of a trapped spirit, or a demonic siren, using the wind to sing a mesmerizing song designed to lure travelers off their path and into destruction. The air was actively communicating with an unseen musical malice. The terror was that the sound seemed to have no source, it simply resonated from the very structure of the world around you. This convinced people that the entire atmosphere was alive and singing, demanding attention. In maritime lore, these wind voices were the calls of drowned sailors who were trying to warn the living but whose voices had been permanently corrupted by the sea and the cruel wind. The creepiest modern manifestation is the low, powerful resonance sometimes generated by large bridge cables in high winds. The deep, inhuman sound can be felt in the chest and causes a profound sense of anxiety and dread. It is the vast, unseen power of the wind transformed into a tangible, musical entity that seems to sigh and groan with infinite desolate sorrow. The toxic atmosphere of the bogs and swamps naturally release methane and other gases, which can disorient and suffocate travellers. This heavy toxic air was believed to be the breath of the bog spirit, a jealous entity who used the poisonous atmosphere as a form of natural territorial defence. Entering a swamp was not just walking on soft ground, it was stepping into a chamber of calculated atmospheric death, breathing the spirit's foul essence. The most terrifying visual clue was the will-o'-the-wisp, the faint dancing light caused by burning gases. This light was believed to be the bog spirit's lantern, actively leading travellers off the path and deeper into the suffocating mire. The soft, gentle light was a fatal lure, a visible deception used by the atmosphere to claim its victims and bury them in the eternal, cold preservation of the peat. In many northern myths, bogs were literal gateways to the underworld, and the foul smell of the air was the scent of the damned rising up through the earth. The constant, damp, cold atmosphere ensured that anything that died in the bog, from people to ancient trees, was kept for eternity, making the swamp a chilling archive of both organic and atmospheric terror. Hailstones of God's wrath. Exceptionally large hailstones, sometimes the size of fists or even grapefruit, were seen throughout history as stones of God's wrath. These were not frozen water. They were believed to be the physical ammunition of the heavens, deliberately thrown down by an angry deity to smash crops, shatter buildings, and kill livestock. The atmosphere was a cannon, and the ice was its deadly targeted shot against humanity. The sheer destructive power of a sudden intense hailstorm was enough to convince people that they were under siege by a supernatural enemy. The sound of the stones hitting the ground was interpreted as the mocking laughter of the storm demons celebrating their brief perfect chaos. The horror was in the sudden concentrated violence delivered from an otherwise clear and empty sky. The hailstones themselves, often found with strange crystalline shapes, were sometimes kept as cursed objects. It was believed that melting the hail would release the demonic energy trapped inside the water, ensuring further misfortune. The fact that the sky could spontaneously generate solid, destructive projectiles proved that the atmosphere could corrupt pure water into a solid weapon of death. The air of Hyperborea, eternal cold. Ancient Greeks and Romans spoke of Hyperborea, the land beyond the north wind, where the air was perpetually frozen and the people were said to be blessed or cursed with impossibly long lives. This region became the mythical birthplace of all cold, where the wind itself was born from the frozen breath of giants. It was the physical source of winter, a realm of purity and profound, terrifying cold that no mortal could truly survive. The atmosphere of Hyperborea was considered so rigid that time itself moved differently, allowing for the eternal lives of its mythical inhabitants. Explorers who returned from the Arctic spoke of a cold that seemed to enter the bones, and a light, the aurora, that was the visible trace of the giant's cosmic energy. The North became synonymous with an ultimate unearthly cold that preserved life and despair equally. The lingering horror of the far north is the idea of the living ice. In Inuit legends, the immense pressure and cold of the sea ice created sentient, crystalline entities. This meant that the deepest cold was not merely a physical state, but a conscious, intelligent being that used the frozen atmosphere to hunt, making the white void a territory ruled by an impossible, powerful predator. The sky's final gift, the rain of oil. Among the most bizarre atmospheric events are historical accounts of rain of oil, or greasy viscous precipitation. This thick, foul-smelling rain was believed to be the ultimate sign of the sky's corruption, the atmosphere decaying and raining down its own internal organic filth. It was a terrifying inversion, where the water of life was replaced by a sticky, dark, and utterly useless fluid of death and decay. The fear was intense because the oily residue made everything slippery and impossible to clean, suggesting a permanent spiritual stain on the land. People believed the rain was the result of a demonic entity marking its property, covering the fields and towns in its own corrupting grease to signify its dominion over the physical world. The atmosphere was the source of a physical, pervasive curse. While modern science suggests these events could be due to massive concentrations of biological matter, algae, bacteria, or industrial fallout, the historical reaction reveals a deep primal dread. The sky, the source of purity, had rained down a fluid that defied all natural law. The fact that the water was corrupted into a useless dark grease proved that the very elements could be turned against mankind. The witch's cradle, tornadoes and whirlwinds. The destructive power of a tornado or violent whirlwind was not viewed as simple wind speed. It was the physical manifestation of a spiritual ritual. It was often called the witch's cradle, or the devil's dance. The rapid, swirling air was believed to be a chaotic portal ripped open by sorcerers or demons using a powerful spell. The sheer funnel of destruction was a visible proof of their power to command the very atmosphere. The fear was that the wind was not merely destroying property, but actively collecting things. When objects or animals were lifted high into the sky, it was believed that the demons were stealing them to use as ingredients for dark rituals or as playthings in their aerial dance. The appearance of a tornado was a visible robbery, with the atmosphere serving as the demon's willing, crushing hand reaching down from the clouds. In some traditions, the only way to stop the spiral was to throw a piece of cold iron or a blessed object into the centre of the vortex, hoping to corrupt the spell that powered the storm. The unnerving speed and noise of the whirlwind symbolized the ultimate chaos, proving that nature, when corrupted by evil, could weaponize the gentlest air into a violent, earth-shattering engine of death. The waves that devour rogue waves. Rogue waves, massive, unpredictable waves that appear seemingly out of nowhere, often reaching heights far beyond the typical sea state, were not considered natural. Sailors feared them as the jaws of the kraken, or the vengeful hand of a powerful submerged god. These isolated, monstrous walls of water defied physics, proving that the ocean had the power to generate sudden, targeted, intentional destruction. The horror of a rogue wave is its lack of warning. Unlike a storm surge which builds over time, the rogue wave is a sudden, perfect, liquid monster, appearing seconds before it strikes. Mariners believed these waves were seeking revenge for specific sins, or actively hunting specific ships. It was a personalized, watery execution, with the ocean deliberately assembling its vast power for a single fatal blow. Modern analysis confirms that these waves are real and are likely caused by complex interference patterns. But to witness a 100-foot wall of water materialize out of a calm sea is a primal terror, shattering the human assumption of predictability. The sea becomes a vast, intelligent predator, capable of using the atmosphere and currents to generate a perfect liquid trap for the unsuspecting. The sky's scars. Cloud iridescence. When clouds show brilliant, unnatural rainbow-like colours, known as cloud iridescence, it is caused by light diffraction through tiny water droplets. To ancient observers, this was the sight of the sky being scarred or broken. The unnatural shifting colours were believed to be a glimpse into the terrible raw energy just beyond the veil of the normal atmosphere, a glimpse of the primordial chaos beneath the sky. The fear was not in the beauty, but in the instability of the colours. They shifted too fast, blending in ways that defied the simple rainbow. This instability was a sign that the gods were fighting, or that the foundational laws of the cosmos were momentarily breaking down. The atmosphere was showing its wound, proving that the boundary between the mortal and the divine was fragile and temporary. In certain cultures, the iridescent cloud was a portal, a brief, shining window into the realm of the dead, allowing souls to escape or demons to enter. To look at it too long was dangerous, as the non-physical energy could corrupt the viewer's sight. The atmosphere, using simple physics, became an active, visible liability, showing its profound, colourful weaknesses to the tiny mortals below. The rain that floats, virga. Virga is rain or ice crystals that fall from a cloud but evaporate before they reach the ground. The sight of rain that simply vanishes mid-air was deeply unnerving. It was believed that the atmosphere itself was consuming the water, proving it was a sentient, starving entity that would not allow the life-giving rain to reach the earth. The air was actively hoarding the essential element of survival. This rain that floats was often interpreted as a sign of imminent, devastating drought, a divine promise of water that was instantly broken by a malicious atmospheric force. The clouds were mocking the mortals below, displaying the water they needed before snatching it away. This psychological torment was a cruel reminder that the atmosphere could deliberately withhold life in plain sight. In some desert communities, Virga was seen as the tears of the sky serpent, a vast celestial entity whose suffering was so great that its tears evaporated before they could quench the thirst of the land. The weather was a tangible sign of cosmic sorrow, and the fear was that the serpent's sorrow would never end, condemning the mortals below to perpetual drought and despair. The voice of the earthquake, seismic hum. Before or during massive earthquakes, many people report hearing a low-frequency, deep, unsettling sound, often called the seismic hum. This sound, which can be difficult to pinpoint, was interpreted as the literal groan of a powerful underground demon being squeezed by the tectonic plates, or a massive subterranean beast turning in its sleep. The noise was the vocal signature of the Earth's profound discomfort. This low hum is terrifying because it feels like it is vibrating inside the listener's chest, proof that the sound is non-physical and supernatural. It suggests that the atmosphere is actively amplifying the Earth's pain, transmitting the profound trauma of the planet directly into the human body. The noise, often dismissed as imagination, is a physiological assault that signals the atmosphere is about to break. The most famous modern case is the Taos hum, a persistent low-frequency noise heard by certain residents in Taos, New Mexico, which defies conventional explanation. The fact that a deep, inexplicable sound can plague a localized atmosphere for decades suggests that some forces are perpetually groaning just beneath the threshold of human hearing, waiting for the perfect moment to erupt into open chaos. The Sun's corrupted twin, Anthelion. Anthelion is a bright spot on the opposite side of the sky from the Sun, caused by ice crystal refraction. This perfect, terrifyingly bright reflection was believed to be the Sun's evil twin, a corrupted mirror image created by the forces of darkness. It was a sign that the cosmos had achieved an unnatural balance, with a source of pure light and a countersource of malignant light existing simultaneously. The appearance of the Anthelion was seen as the start of a spiritual shadow war, where the forces of day and night were battling using light itself as a weapon. Its position opposite the Sun meant that the darkness had found a way to mimic light, creating a deceptive, equally powerful source of celestial energy. To look at the reflection was to risk drawing the attention of the Sun's malevolent, watchful twin. In apocalyptic folklore, the Anthelion was often a warning that the end times were near, when the light itself would begin to turn against humanity. The atmosphere was serving as a giant, perfect celestial mirror for evil, allowing the forces of the void to create a terrifying doppelganger of the thing that gives life. The fear was that the corrupted twin would eventually eclipse the real Sun forever. The wind that stops the heart, the Mistral. Specific regional winds, such as the Mistral in southern France, were historically blamed for strange psychological effects: sudden madness, intense anxiety, and violent, uncontrollable rage. People believed these winds were physically carrying a spiritual toxin, or the malicious breath of a specific local demon who used the air current to inflict psychological torment. The wind itself was a vessel for mental corruption. In the regions affected, the intense, sudden, cold wind was seen as actively stripping the human mind of its emotional control, driving calm individuals to fits of fury or deep, suicidal despair. Legal defences were sometimes built around the idea that the Mistral wind drove me to it, proving that the atmosphere was viewed as a powerful, external source of psychological pathology that absolved the individual of responsibility. The enduring horror of the Mistral is that it is often a clear wind, bringing beautiful, intense blue skies, but also intense, crushing psychological dread. The contradiction of beautiful weather carrying profound, inexplicable depression and violence makes the phenomenon terrifying. It proves that the atmosphere can be perfectly clear while simultaneously being completely poisoned with invisible, non-physical torment. The sky that opens, holes in clouds. When a sudden, perfectly circular or elliptical hole appears in a cloud layer, a full streak hole or cavum, it is caused by supercooled water droplets freezing. However, the sight of the sky simply opening up was terrifyingly interpreted as a temporary window into the actual heavens, or, worse, a hole torn in the fabric of reality by an unseen, colossal hand. It was a visual rupture in the protective, atmospheric barrier. The fear was that anything could fall through that hole. Ancient observers expected to see angels, demons, or impossible objects drop directly from the sky. The hole was a visible point of vulnerability, a place where the gods could watch the mortals unobserved, or where the void itself could begin to seep through, slowly infecting the atmosphere with its cold, silent emptiness. In some traditions, the hole was seen as the physical signature of a massive weapon fired from the celestial sphere, which had just passed through the atmosphere. The clouds were merely showing the scar of a cosmic battle that had just concluded, proving that the events of the gods were constantly happening just above our heads, with the cloud hole acting as the brief, terrifying evidence. The waterspout, the ocean's rope. A waterspout, a rotating column of water descending from a cloud to a body of water, was deeply feared by sailors as the ocean's rope or the dragon's tail. It was believed that a colossal subterranean sea serpent was using the waterspout as a flexible, mile-long neck to reach into the atmosphere and observe the ships before dragging them down into its deep-sea lair. The horror was in the creature's assumed intelligence. The sight of the spout suggested that the monster was not merely lurking, but actively scouting the surface, using the atmosphere to communicate its position and mark its prey. The sudden, violent connection between sea and sky proved that two elemental realms could cooperate to generate a single, powerful engine of destruction aimed directly at the surface. The fear that the water column contained the creature's actual soul was pervasive. It was believed that firing a cannonball into the spout could sever the connection, causing the monster to die or retreat. This violent act was seen as a ritualized necessity, a desperate war against a terrifying sentient entity that used the atmospheric conditions to manifest its vast, hungry power. The sound of the thunder. God thunder, the powerful low-frequency acoustic shockwave created by lightning, was viewed universally as the actual voice of a vengeful god, be it Zeus, Thor, or Indra. The sound was not a side effect of the flash. It was the main event, a calculated, terrifying bellow meant to strike fear into the hearts of mortals. The atmosphere was the god's megaphone, amplifying his righteous fury. The fear was that the sound was actively carrying the curse. Since the speed of sound is slower than light, the terrifying roar always followed the visual flash, giving a brief, silent moment of dread before the sky itself began to scream. This temporal delay was seen as the god giving the mortal a final, terrifying moment of reflection before delivering the full, crushing force of his booming curse. In some traditions, the direction of the thunder was crucial. If the sound came from the north, it meant war. If it came from the west, it meant plague. The atmosphere was a compass of doom, using the booming sound to telegraph the exact nature of the impending doom. The entire event was a choreographed display of supernatural power, using light and sound to maximize human terror and despair. The Watcher's Eyes, Sundog's parhelia. When bright, intense patches of light appear symmetrically on either side of the sun, known as sundogs or parhelia, they were terrifyingly interpreted as the Watcher's Eyes. They were not reflections, but the actual secondary celestial eyes of the sun god, actively scanning the earth for sinners and trespassers. The atmosphere was being used as a lens to enhance the god's perpetual, high-altitude surveillance. The unnerving dread came from the duality of the light. The single sun was benign, but the two flanking lights were cold, perfect, and silent, a trio of unblinking solar scrutiny. It meant that every action performed under the sun was being simultaneously recorded by three separate, powerful sources of divine light. The appearance of the sundog signalled an immediate, intense focus on the world below. In some northern myths, the sundogs were the frozen, ghostly remnants of an earlier failed sun that had been condemned to forever follow its successor, acting as silent, ethereal sentinels. The light was cold and lacked warmth, symbolizing an eternal, unfeeling cosmic judgment. The atmosphere, by creating this perfect three-point geometry, confirmed that the sky was organized for maximum, inescapable surveillance. The frozen tears of the void. Diamond dust. Diamond dust is a meteorological phenomenon where tiny ice crystals fall from a cloudless sky, creating a shimmering, perfect curtain of light in the freezing air. This strange precipitation was interpreted as the frozen tears of the void, the physical residue of the cold, utter emptiness of space crystallizing as it touched the warmer atmosphere. It was a visible sign that the void was weeping its cold sorrow onto the mortal world. The terror was in the unearthly beauty and the silence. It fell without sound and shimmered with an intense alien geometry, each crystal a perfect hexagonal pillar. This unnerving perfection suggested that the crystals were not natural water, but engineered objects dropped from a higher realm. To breathe the air was to inhale the crystalline residue of the cosmos's own despair and coldness. In Siberian lore, the diamond dust was the physical dust of dead gods that had shattered in the upper reaches of the atmosphere. The perfect cold light they reflected was the last beautiful energy of these immense forgotten beings. The atmosphere, by allowing this silent, glittering dust to fall, was delivering a constant, subtle reminder of the chilling, beautiful, yet terrifying end awaiting all things. The Demon's Eye Ring, the Glory. A glory is a circular rainbow-like ring of light and colour that appears around a shadow cast onto a cloud or fog layer, often seen from aircraft or high mountains. This unnerving, perfect ring was called the Demon's Eye Ring, or the Trapped Soul's Halo. It was feared that the circle represented the actual perfect eye of an invisible, colossal being watching from within the mist, using the light to define its terrifying iris. The horror was that the circle was only visible around your shadow. This was irrefutable proof that the hidden atmospheric entity was focused entirely on you, marking you specifically for observation or immediate consumption. The colours were too intense, too close, confirming that the entity was an enormous, spectral predator lurking just beneath the veil of the fog. In Alpine folklore, the glory was the halo of a soul that had drowned in the cloud sea and was permanently trapped, forced to illuminate the fog layer with its spectral, colourful light. The perfection of the circle was a sign of its eternal geometric imprisonment. The atmosphere, by defining your own shadow with this intense, colourful geometry, was proving its power to personalise terror. The Builder's Block, rectangular icebergs and clouds. Rarely massive, perfectly square or rectangular ice formations from icebergs to specific high-altitude clouds are observed. To ancient mariners and skywatchers, these geometric objects were the builder's blocks, or the architectural scaffolding of the gods. Their impossible non-natural angles proved that they were not formed by wind or sea, but deliberately constructed by a vast, intelligent, non-human agency. The sight of a mile-wide, perfectly rectangular object floating in the sea or hanging in the sky shattered the human understanding of natural law. It suggested that there was a higher order of physics and geometry at work, a cosmic builder who used perfect 90-degree angles to construct objects far beyond mortal comprehension. The atmosphere was a silent quarry for these non-Euclidean constructs. The fear was that these blocks were being used for an immense, unknown purpose, perhaps to rebuild the cosmos, or to construct a cage for mankind. Their sheer, cold, square perfection was unsettling, a sign that the chaos of nature was being temporarily overridden by a terrifying, efficient and merciless intelligence that preferred straight lines to curves. The prison's seal, the 22-degree halo. The most common halo is the 22-degree halo, a perfect circle of light encircling the sun or moon, caused by ice crystals. This faultless, geometric barrier was viewed as the prison's seal, or the etheric cage. It was not a sign of divine glory, but proof that a powerful cosmic prisoner, a titan, demon or fallen angel, was trapped behind an unbreachable geometric energy field, placed there by the highest gods. The perfection of the 22-degree angle, always the same, always flawless, convinced observers that the sky was using a form of higher geometric mathematics to maintain the cosmic order. The seal's existence meant that a terrifying entity was perpetually struggling just beyond the visible circle, its power contained by the atmosphere's crystalline geometry. The subtle, cold colours of the halo, often lacking the intense warmth of a rainbow, only amplified the dread, suggesting a cage of pure, sterile energy. The atmosphere, by creating this constant, perfect geometry, was reminding mortals that the sky was a prison yard, and that the greatest, most powerful terrors were not free, but actively contained by a mathematical, cold force of law, the spears of the frost giants, ice needles. In incredibly cold, still air, ice crystals form perfect, sharp, pencil-like shapes, known as ice needles or ice spicules. This phenomenon was not seen as precipitation, but as the spears of the frost giants, falling, frozen weaponry being sharpened and dropped by the enormous malicious entities that ruled the highest, coldest reaches of the atmosphere. The air itself was a forge of death. The crystals are so sharp and numerous that they can be felt on the skin, a sensation interpreted as the giants testing their perfect cold points. The terror was that these needles were capable of causing minute fatal wounds, freezing the blood or introducing an immediate icy disease. The atmosphere, through this silent, perfect precipitation, was constantly showering the earth with invisible geometric threats. The fear was amplified by the way the needles catch the light, creating sudden, blinding flares that disorient and momentarily cripple the observer. The giants were using their geometric weapons to achieve both physical and psychological warfare. The perfection of the needle shape was the final, chilling proof that nature could create weapons far more deadly and precise than any made by man. The bridge to the cold afterlife, fogbow. A fogbow is a rainbow created by light hitting fog droplets, resulting in a broad, colourless arc of light. This monochromatic, ghostly geometry was terrifyingly interpreted as the bridge to the cold afterlife, or the rainbow of the dead. It was feared that the lack of colour meant it was a purely spiritual phenomenon, a spectral bridge leading souls away from the vibrant world of the living and into the pale realm of the departed. The unnerving dread came from the sheer perfection of the white geometry. While irregular rainbows symbolised hope and covenant, the fog bow was a sign of absolute, cold finality, a perfectly formed path into the void. To walk toward the fog bow was to accept immediate silent death, being drawn into the pallid purity of the cold atmosphere. In certain maritime legends, the fog bow marked the exact location where a ghost ship had drowned, and the white arch was the permanent spectral memory of the ship's final, desperate attempt to touch the sky. The atmosphere, by stripping the light of its colour, created a chilling, unsettling geometric structure, a symbol of death that was as beautiful as it was utterly horrifying. The furrows of the Earth's plough, cloud streets. Cloud streets are long, parallel, perfectly uniform rolls of cumulus clouds, often stretching for hundreds of miles. This striking, unnatural symmetry was viewed as the furrows of the Earth's plough, or the god's fields. It was believed that a colossal primary god was using the atmosphere as a farming field, creating these geometric rows to grow and harvest immense celestial crops. The geometric precision of the parallel lines was profoundly unsettling, suggesting that the entire atmosphere was being actively managed and organised for a non-human purpose. The fear was that the atmosphere was not meant for human life, but was merely the soil for a cosmic silent agriculture that would eventually consume or discard the tiny mortals living between the furrows. To see these perfect rows confirmed the suspicion that the Earth was merely a small piece of a much larger, impossibly vast and perfectly organised cosmic machine. The clouds were not random, they were part of a terrifying, pre-planned geometric network. The atmosphere, by displaying this perfect, infinite parallelism, confirmed the existence of a higher dimensional calculating intelligence. God's searchlights, crepuscular rays. Crepuscular rays, sunlight filtered through gaps in clouds or mountains, appearing as distinct columns of light, were seen as God's searchlights, or the rays of judgment. These perfectly geometric beams of light were believed to be the fingers of an unseen deity, actively pointing out specific spots on the earth, marking them for immediate blessing, or, more terrifyingly, for swift, localized destruction. The fact that the rays appeared to converge at the sun, though they are parallel, gave them a sense of terrifying, deliberate focus. It was the visual equivalent of an omnipotent entity, using a high-powered lens to focus its immense energy onto a tiny point. The atmosphere was a dark theatre, and the light was the single, blinding spot focused on the unwitting actor below. The fear was that these rays carried specific, lethal intent. If a ray landed on your house or field, it meant you were currently under divine scrutiny, and your fate was about to be decided. The atmosphere, using simple dust and moisture, created a perfect theatrical geometry of doom, proving that the most beautiful light could also be the most terrifying instrument of judgment. The architect's illusion, Fata Morgana. A Fata Morgana is a complex, superior mirage caused by a steep thermal inversion that distorts distant objects, making them appear stretched, stacked, or elevated, often creating the illusion of phantom cities or castles in the sky. This was the architect's illusion, a deliberate, terrifying display by a malicious atmospheric entity intent on luring travellers to a non-existent, beautiful death. The geometric distortion was the most unsettling feature. Objects were not merely mirrored but bent into impossible geometric stacks of towers and spires, proving that the atmosphere could corrupt light into a form of active, complex illusion. These phantom cities were believed to be the home of powerful fairies or demons, who used the illusion to mock the reality of the mortals below. The lingering horror is the realization that the atmosphere can be the source of perfect, total deception. It can manufacture an entire, complex geometric reality that is completely false, leading the desperate traveller to chase a beautiful impossibility until they collapse. The air, through simple temperature layers, proves its ability to become the master of terrifying geometric trickery. The silent scream, infrasound. Infrasound, sound frequencies too low for humans to consciously hear, is constantly generated by earthquakes, volcanoes, and high-altitude winds. This invisible acoustic pressure was feared as the silent scream, or the Earth's hum of madness. While inaudible, it is registered by the body, causing chronic unease, intense paranoia, and sudden, inexplicable terror. It was believed to be the non-physical voice of a cosmic entity, whose agony was so vast it could only be broadcast on a frequency below human comprehension. The terror of infrasound is that it attacks the mind from within a perfect silent shell. You feel the dread, the nausea, and the panic, yet there is no observable source, leading victims to believe their own sanity is betraying them. The atmosphere becomes a giant, silent amplifier for pure acoustic trauma, proving that the most dangerous weapon is the one you can only feel, not hear. In conspiratorial lore, ancient structures were often built to intentionally harness or amplify natural infrasound, using the atmosphere as a passive weapon to control or drive away trespassers. The atmosphere, a silent acoustic ocean, is constantly bombarding us with the emotional residue of the planet's own suffering, a permanent physical groan we're all forced to endure, whether we know it or not. The fingerprints of the Titans, atmospheric gravity waves. Atmospheric gravity waves are massive ripples or wrinkles that form in the air, often seen as parallel bands of cloud in the upper atmosphere. These geometric patterns were the terrifying fingerprints of the Titans, the visible proof that colossal conscious non-physical entities were actively manipulating the air. The atmosphere was being bent and shaped by a force far beyond human scale. The perfect vast geometry of the waves suggests that the air is not a fluid medium but a responsive membrane that can be physically pressed by beings of immense size and power. To see these ripples meant that the sky was in motion not due to storm, but due to the casual, deliberate touch of a cosmic giant passing through the upper reaches. The fear was that these subtle ripples dictated local fate. The way the air was compressed or stretched by the Titan's touch could lead to localized bursts of good fortune or sudden, inexplicable disasters. The atmosphere, revealing its geometric ripples, proved it was merely the skin of the cosmos, responding to the vast, indifferent touch of entities that exist entirely outside of human comprehension. The shrouds of the dead gods, noctilucent clouds. Noctilucent clouds, the highest, coldest, and rarest clouds, visible only in the deep twilight, were seen as the shrouds of the dead gods. These ethereal, brilliant blue-silver streamers were believed to be the actual physical vapour of powerful deities who had perished in the vast high-altitude cold. The atmosphere was actively mourning, draping the remains of its former masters in spectral light. Their incredible height and eerie light quality suggested that they belonged not to the Earth, but to the cold abyss of space, acting as a final, silent repository for cosmic death. To look up at them was to witness the end of something truly immense, a terrifying reminder that even the most powerful celestial beings were subject to final decay in the cold, unfeeling atmosphere. In certain high-latitude myths, these clouds were a dire omen. The sight of the gods' shrouds meant that humanity was now without celestial protection, left alone to face the raw, cold entropy of the universe. The atmosphere, using microscopic space dust to form its highest clouds, became a chilling, luminous memorial to a cosmic collapse that was guaranteed to eventually claim all life. The cosmic stake, the zenith. The zenith is the point in the sky directly above the observer. In terrifying cosmologies, it was not merely a point of geometry, but the cosmic stake, the single, absolute point where the entire enormous weight of the heavens was physically nailed down to the world. It was the point of pure, crushing, divine pressure, focused directly onto the unsuspecting mortal below. The fear was that this invisible point was the source of all atmospheric curses, as all malevolent celestial energy must pass through it to reach the earth. To feel exposed beneath the zenith was to feel the weight of creation focused onto your skull, a feeling of inescapable high-dimensional authority. Every person was living under a constantly shifting, invisible target, marked by the geometry of the sky. In ritual, people often refused to sleep directly under the zenith, believing that the concentrated cosmic pressure would cause madness, nightmares, or immediate fatal spiritual crushing. The atmosphere, in this context, was a field of immense pressure, and the zenith was the focal point of the sky's ultimate geometric malice, the one place where escape from the sky's curse was impossible. The witch's lantern, St. Elmo's fire. St. Elmo's fire is a weather phenomenon where a bright glowing plasma discharge appears on mast tops, spires, or wingtips, caused by high atmospheric electric fields. Sailors feared this chilling, luminous discharge as the witch's lantern, or the demon's candle. It was not a sign of safe electricity, but the visible signature of a powerful, malevolent entity using the ship's own mast to lure it toward a reef or into the deepest part of the storm. The horror was that the light was always silent and cold, a terrifying, beautiful, disembodied glow that offered no warmth or warning, only the slow, certain promise of doom. The sight of the plasma meant the ship had been spiritually corrupted, its own structure used by the storm demons to light the way to its watery grave. In medieval belief, the glowing light was the physical manifestation of a cursed soul, permanently shackled to the highest point of the ship, forced to eternally glow as a beacon of misfortune for all who followed. The atmosphere, by allowing the air's electricity to manifest as this chilling, beautiful plasma, became a co-conspirator in the sea's most cunning, deceptive traps. The Bacchae of God, the Gegenschein. The Gegenschein, German for counterglow, is an extremely faint elliptical glow visible in the night sky, exactly opposite the sun, caused by backscattered zodiacal light. This elusive, silent glow was interpreted as the Bacchae of God, a final, absolute point of surveillance placed by the cosmic architect. It was the eye that was always open when the primary sun was down, ensuring perpetual, inescapable scrutiny. The terror was in its extreme subtlety. The Gegenschein is so faint that it can only be detected in perfectly clear, dark skies, suggesting that the god's deepest secrets are only revealed when the human world is at its quietest. It was proof that even when the sun was gone, you were being watched from the most difficult, farthest possible angle of the cosmos. This phenomenon tied into the idea of a geometric god, an entity so vast that it required multiple points of light and geometry to maintain its total vision. The light opposite the sun was the final cold reassurance that even the darkness offered no hiding place. The atmosphere, by transmitting this faint celestial signal, confirmed that human life was a constant brightly lit stage for an immense, silent, multifaceted audience. The voices of the first ones, plasma echoes. Naturally occurring plasma echoes and unexplained radio reflections in the ionosphere were not heard as mere static. They were the voices of the first ones. These random bursts of noise and static were believed to be the primordial, chaotic language of the cosmic entities who preceded humanity, occasionally bleeding through the atmosphere's barrier when solar activity was high. The fear was that these sounds were the only true, raw communication the universe offered. They lacked human structure, grammar, or meaning, suggesting a form of intelligence so vast and alien that it could only communicate through pure energetic chaos. To hear the static was to have a brief, terrifying exposure to the fundamental non-human chaos that underpinned all reality. In occult circles, attempts were made to intentionally amplify these atmospheric noises, hoping to decipher the secrets of the first ones and harness their chaotic power. The atmosphere, by passively reflecting and amplifying these bursts of cosmic noise, became a vast, unstable telephone line, capable of receiving the most terrifying, incomprehensible messages from the cold, violent edge of space. Text to image. Prompt. A powerful Baroque oil painting on canvas in the style of Caravaggio. A man is holding an ancient, crackling radio receiver in a dark room. The sky outside is filled with visible, chaotic static and bursts of white noise, resembling abstract, violent cosmic energy tearing through the atmosphere. Intense focus on the sound's terrifying visual. Negative prompt. Photo photography, CGI, render, 3D, Pixar. Total. Actual words, 265. The ethereal chains, the Van Allen belts. The Van Allen belts, the twin rings of highly charged particles held in place by Earth's magnetic field, were conceived of as the ethereal chains, or the rings of containment. This invisible magnetic geometry was not seen as a benign defense, but as a deliberately constructed energy cage, holding back an unthinkable primordial cosmic horror that would instantly annihilate life if it were ever released. The power and geometry of the belt suggested a permanent massive defensive spell woven by the Earth itself. The constant silent pressure of the trapped particles was the proof that something immense was perpetually struggling just beyond the edge of the atmosphere, its power contained only by this invisible, magnetic geometry. This fear led to the terrifying conclusion that the atmosphere was not protecting us from space, but protecting us from something else trapped in space, just beyond the reach of human perception. The entire Earth was living in a protective bubble, and the chains were merely the visible stress lines of the force field. The atmosphere, by defining the boundaries of this magnetic prison, was the ultimate jailer for the unspeakable. The sealed edge, the final horizon, the visible curvature of the Earth at the horizon, the final horizon, was terrifyingly interpreted not as a geological feature but as the sealed edge. It was the ultimate geometric boundary, a final circular seal woven by the gods to prevent mortals from ever witnessing the true, terrifying nature of the world that lay just beyond the visual limit. The atmosphere was the lens that maintained this grand global deception. The fear was that if a mortal ever crossed that final, visible curve, they would find not a new land, but the raw, unmade chaos of the void, or the actual physical end of reality. The illusion of a continuous world was maintained only by the atmospheric optics and the mind's refusal to accept the truth of the geometric silent ceiling of the world. This concept synthesized the theme of illusion and geometry, proving that the most profound terror is not in what we see, but in the certainty that the single, visible, curve of the ocean or land is the final, inescapable wall. The atmosphere, by smoothly blending light and air to maintain the deception, was the ultimate conspirator, guaranteeing that humanity would remain forever trapped within its safe, beautiful, geometric lie. 100. The grand cage, the atmosphere itself. The chilling synthesis of all 100 facts is the realization that the atmosphere itself is the grand cage. It is not a benevolent blanket of air, but a perfectly calibrated, multi-layered, multifaceted prison designed by an unknown cosmic intelligence. The wind is the master's breath, the light is the master's surveillance, and the geometric phenomena are the stress lines and enforcement seals of the confinement. The final terrifying truth is that every phenomenon, from the silent hum to the perfect halo, is a piece of a singular, vast mechanism. The atmosphere contains all the necessary elements for physical and psychological terror. It can withhold breath, project illusions, amplify the voices of the dead, inflict madness, and, through light's geometry, ensure that every single mortal action is recorded and judged. We are not victims of chaotic nature, but inmates in a perfectly managed, beautiful, and inescapable enclosure. Our lives unfold in the temporary warmth of a massive cold engine of physics and fate, a cage built of air, light, and sound. The final horror is that the greatest conspiracy is the very blue sky that greets us every morning. We have travelled through a storm of historical fear, connecting 100 facts that confirm one terrible suspicion. The atmosphere is alive with ancient energy. Before you allow the silence of the rain or the rhythmic drumming of the wind to lull you to sleep, take one last, long look at the shadows dancing across your room. They are not merely shadows, they are echoes of the horrors we have just explored. If these histories resonate with the dark corners of your own mind, if you feel the lingering chill of ancient superstitions, then join the chorus of whispers. Subscribe, and turn on notifications. The sky is vast, and there are countless other secrets hidden in its mists, waiting for us to unveil them in the dark. Let us know in the comments, what is the single creepiest thing the sky has ever done? And so, we leave the tempest and return to the quiet of the present, but remember the lesson of the cursed wind and the blood-red rain. The The elements do not forget. Every drop of water that falls, every gust of air that passes, has borne witness to humanity's most frightening moments, and has been imprinted with our deepest superstitions. Tonight, the air is still, but the central question of our series, what dark force connects all these separate horrors, has only deepened. Sleep now, and listen closely. You may find that the gentle drumming on your windowpane is not just rain, but the sound of history knocking, waiting to pull you back into the mystery.